Most of us are made to believe that colonialism is a system that ended several decades ago and that all colonized lands in Africa and the rest of the global south are now independent. But this is a simplification, and in some cases it can be a deadly one. A case in point which right now is engulfed in a crisis is the southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. Ambazonia is a territory located between Cameroon and Nigeria in West Africa. Since 1961, it has been under military occupation by the French colonial regime in Cameroon, and most people erroneously consider it to be part of Cameroon. For many years, there have been waves of protests against the occupation. Most of these protests led by students and teachers who bear the brunt of the inequality of the occupation in the classroom. These protests arise in response to efforts by the Cameroonian regime to dismantle Ambazonia's effective and popular network of parent-teachers associations and to require testing in French. The most recent wave of protests, which began in October 2016, was led by lawyers who were responding to an attempt to dismantle the Ambazonian common law-based judicial system and replace it with the French colonial civil law system, as well as forced trials to be conducted in French. Why do Ambazonians defend their autonomous infrastructure and insist on their right to conduct business in English? Why don't they want to join with their brothers in French-speaking Cameroon? This is a question that many observers in the international community wonder about. Why can't those Africans just get along with each other? Asks the media. Some write the conflict off as driven by internalized clinging to colonial era identities. But wait a minute, how did we get here? History. It is the 15th century, the age of European discovery. Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus sailed the high seas in search of new territories for the empires. Wait, we don't have to go that far. 1858. Bimbia, Ambazonia, a coastal village in West Africa. A British missionary, Alfred Secker of the London Baptist Missionary Society, establishes here the British colony of Victoria. It is an imperial rush. Belgium King Leopold II declares the Congo as his personal Congo Free State. An estimated 10 million Africans perish under Leopold's treacherous plunder. All over Africa, Europeans trespass on each other. The scramble for Africa is in full throttle. It is a real tragedy of the commons, a free for all party. It's 1884. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck organizes the Berlin Conference, the formal partition of Africa for colonialism, organized European looting of Africa, a 19th century version of the World Trade Organization. In 1887, Britain gives Ambazonia to the Germans as a way to assuage relationships between the two European countries. Germany adds Ambazonia on other lands in the area under her possession to create a German colony called Cameroon. In 1914, the strife over control of colonial territories leads to World War I anyway. Germany lost the war and Cameroon was partitioned to its component parts, with Ambazonia returned to Britain as the League of Nations mandate of the Southern Cameroons. In 1945, when the United Nations was created, Ambazonia became a United Nations Trust Territory, still under British administration. The plan at this stage was the Trust Territory phase would end with independence, yet there were competing agendas at play that ultimately would derail this intention. Following the end of the World War, the international moral consensus against colonialism grew, a reality reflected in the name Trust Territory. Many administrators of the colonies during this time took seriously the task of preparing the colonies for independence. In Ambazonia, they worked in cooperation with the indigenous community to build hundreds of effective public institutions, such as parent-teachers unions and farmers' cooperatives. These institutions were a long way toward dismantling the unilateral control implemented during the previous stage of colonialism and returned a great deal of power and resources to the people. One fruit of this empowerment work was that in 1954, Ambazonia experienced a peaceful transfer of power from one elected prime minister, albeit with limited authority, to another, the first such peaceful transition in post-colonial Africa. The memory of that experience of effective democracy is still strong. Yet, during this time, Britain was still benefiting economically from their colonies. Because of resources, neither Britain nor France wanted to lose the economic benefit they got from this colonial relationship. Also, partly driven by the fear of communist influence, London decided that full independence was a no option for Ambazonia. This motive is documented in a declassified cable sent by the then U.S. Consul General in Nigeria on May 11, 1959. In 1961, the United Nations gave the Ambazonian people the choice between joining Nigeria as a state or joining Cameroon as a partner in a two-state confederation. Faced with this choice, the Ambazonian people opted for Cameroon in a United Nations administered plebiscite. The specific proposal that the people approved was for the creation of a confederacy between the two countries, in which each region would retain its constitutions, language, and autonomous institutions like parliament, judiciary, and others. But this vision would never be realized. From the Ambazonia perspective, colonialism has never ended but only changed form. Almost immediately, the Cameroon regime acted to undermine parliamentary processes and eventually and unilaterally disbanded the Ambazonian parliament. It deposed pro-independence Ambazonian Prime Minister Augustin Gomjua and eventually assassinated him. It further went to disband the local police forces, public works department, heavy-duty civil construction machinery, network for farming cooperatives, financial and credit management organs, the National Bank, industrial infrastructure, public electricity corporation, 2 natural deep-sea ports, 4 airports, Cameroon Air Transport, which was #1 in Africa then, an effort to undermine the parents teachers associations, which has been resisted every step of the way by movements of teachers and students, to say the least. All economic projects have been relocated from Ambazonia by the regime to French Cameroon. Most significant, the pipeline that conveys oil from Sonora in Victoria in Ambazonia to French Cameroon. Ambazonia is practically left with no industrial activities, thus 60% of unemployment. All indigenous festivals and local traditions impeded or assimilated. This pattern of arrested development or intentional underdevelopment is nothing but colonialism and has created a gulf between Ambazonia and Cameroon. It is a horrible situation, widely misunderstood by most Ambazonians who see nothing but French new colonialism. Franc-Afrique is the name given to all French African colonies. None of them owns its money nor print it, but rather use the Paris-controlled Central African franc, which was and is a colonial mechanism for economic control. French puppet Paul Biya has controlled Cameroon since 1975, marched in the streets of Paris as a student against the independence of his own country. In their records, he is the longest reigning dictator in the world. Paul Biya is an unapologetic puppet of new colonialism, as he declared in the French press, by his own words, as Mitterrand's best student. To critics of Franc-Afrique, these words speak volumes. All colonialism is bad, but the French practice a particular brutal variety. We all know about Haiti and its crippling debt by the French to compensate the loss of slaves. In Guinea-Conakry is a particular case in Africa. Upon defeat by independence movements, French military commanders systematically oversaw the complete evisceration of all economic infrastructures. The French masterminded the assassination of almost every single independence movement leader in their former colonies, including Barthélemy Boganda, Central Africa, Cameroon, Burkina Faso. In deep contrast, many independence leaders in non-French colonies went to lead their countries after independence. The goal of all this behavior is to rob the people of all forms of power and human dignity. This colonial behavior is not widely known in the English-speaking world, but in the French colonies, including the special case of Ambazonia. For this reason, the movement refers to the regime as the French New Colonial Regime in Cameroon. And right now, the violent abuses being deployed by this regime are escalating by the day. Since September 22, 2017, the Cameroon government has been carrying out a systematic and ruthless military campaign against the people of Ambazonia, committing numerous violations of international human rights law. As per December 2018, more than 30,000 people seek refuge in Nigeria. More than 400,000 are internally displaced persons, as reported to United Nations Security Council by Director of Humanitarian Operations. With more than 40% increase, Cameroon has now one of the fastest growing displacement crises in Africa. Some 106 villages have been burned per the last count in August 2018 by the Center of Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. 2,500 activists abducted and jailed. The prisoners include the prominent non-violence advocate Julius Ayoktabe and 11 of his senior staff, who were abducted by Nigerian authorities and handed over to Cameroon in early 2017 against international law, while planning for a session on UNHCR to discuss the refugee crisis. In order to prevent people from communicating about these travesties, the government instituted a non-stop internet and cellular network blackout for over 100 days. Communication rights activists protest, and the action backfired and increased awareness of the Ambazonian plight. This is power that your attention and concern has. Some international media and human rights groups are parroting the regime's position. The Ambazonia diaspora is working hard to counter these lies and to expose the political context that gives them traction. Please help by educating yourself and raising your voice for the rights and dignity of our Ambazonians and of all people.